Shall we just start?
Yeah.
Yeah? Well, now, Germany, for example, had a goal of 1 million electric vehicle by 2020, and everyone was like, yeah, but where are the cars? Not the cars, it was the bicycles. Turned out that a lot of people started to buy electric bicycles because they give you a push when you have to, go up a mountain, and they give you more range, so it's increasing kind of the quality of the ride. But then obviously also more rail-based electric mobility. Here, Delhi Metro. Up here you have one of the first products developed in Norway, one of the leading European markets. When you look at per capita diffusion of electric vehicles, it was their own product, the Buddy, a collaboration with a Danish company. And then obviously buses and a lot talked about vehicle, the Tesla, which actually very early on thought about combining a full electric vehicle with renewable energies, which is what I call climate neutral electric mobility. The combination of a battery electric vehicle with clean energy sources. Here a little bit of some technical details. Where we are coming from. This is a German description, but doesn't matter too much because it's more about how things are assembled. Here, the conventional vehicle, we have a fuel tank, we have internal combustion engine, and then gradually, actually starting in Japan, we see some mild hybrid forms, and then what we are specifically interested in, because it's the more challenging electric mobility when you have to have additional infrastructure, is these forms of electric mobility. From some plug-in hybrids, which normally have two systems in parallel, an internal combustion engine and an electric engine. And then the more kind of, puristic approaches, the full battery electric vehicle, no internal combustion engine left. And then a few people might not know the fuel cell. The fuel cell is also considered an electric vehicle because it transforms hydrogen into electricity, and then there's this electric engine in the vehicle. Okay, a little bit of a flashback. Actually, parallel to the internal combustion engine, you also had electric vehicles being developed. The electric engine around a similar time developed in Germany as the internal combustion engine. But then over time, with the Americans kind of starting to opt for the internal combustion engine, the Ford production, Model T, mass production, the electric vehicle kind of lost traction. Anyways, with the oil crisis in the 70s, the ideas kind of started to come back. This is an image from Germany. No fuel in the petrol pump, so what will you do? Will you go back to very conventional forms of mobility? And then the first real push for electrification came with the California Air Resources Board regulation in the early 1990s. They had a zero-emission vehicle policy. In large part, a lot of the narrative, the motives go back to bad air quality, also in California. And we find that also today in China, in India, a lot of push, even Germany, for electrification, full electrification due to air quality issues. Now, into the future, here we have a market forecast by a foundation called FEAR, based in London. And part of the reason why I'm here in India is this huge share of what we expect as a market share in automobiles in India in 2050, aside China. We're now here, but if you look back a little bit, China and India together will kind of make up the global market of 2025 or so, huh? So massive if this materializes. At the moment, the market is not doing too well for some viral reasons. but I'm quite sure that growth will continue. If you just look back into the Indian statistics, the market size, the complete market size, not just four-wheelers, was 17 million in 2012-13, going up to more than 26 million 2018-19. So that was a growth of 6.7% annually on average. Might come down for this fiscal year, but I'm sure that growth is going to be there. Now, why am I talking about the disentangling of the transport carbon lock-in? It has a lot to do with climate issues, with greenhouse gas emissions. We all know that the internal combustion engine runs on some oil derivative, which is associated with carbon dioxide emissions. Here we have figures from, I believe, 2010, where we had global emissions of 38 gigatons of carbon dioxide. Today it's already more than 55 gigatons in total. Back then, the share of the transport sector in generating these emissions was roughly 1/4. And here we see the breakup. And you can see that road transport is clearly leading a significant, a dominant share of emissions generated in the transport sector. And then here you can see the breakup between light duty and heavy duty vehicles, roughly half-half. On the side, some images that with a special camera try to illustrate the emissions coming out. Up there, it's a bus. Down here, it's an aircraft. So what is this transport carbon lock-in? There are some theories around this. It's normally, going back to Walker and Unruh in 2000, it's normally a complex supply chain, these arrangements around the internal combustion engine, sunk investments in equipment, existing skill sets of the labor force. People are used to do certain things, they're trained to do certain things, and an industry-wide technological paradigm or even regime which embodies taken for granted knowledge and institutions. And if you look into the Indian case specifically, with the opening up of the economy and foreign direct investments, international collaborations, joint ventures, obviously the push back then must have been late 70s, early 80s. The push was towards the internal combustion engine. So the foundations laid in the country are for the internal combustion engine. So what I'm kind of theoretically, but then also conceptually interested in is what could be the unlock functions. Not just for the Indian context, but more broadly. Is there something we can find in theories, in concepts that help us to kind of track the change? Are there some kind of unlock functions that we could study to see where change is emanating from? And there are two European scholars, one I believe Swedish, Anna Bergek, and a Dutch, Schurz, and they have worked with these 7 system innovation functions, starting with entrepreneurial activities, over knowledge development, knowledge diffusion, guidance of the search, market formation, resource mobilization, and advocacy coalition. And in the process of studying energy transitions, or in this case the mobility sector transition, they have then operationalized it, looking into demonstration projects, what is the regulator doing, are there some tax exemptions or maybe obligatory use policies. For example, we spoke about Gadkarina, so when he says that by 2030 there are no more internal combustion engines supposed to get into the market, then he's forcing everyone else to buy electric, theoretically. Anyways, so this is the conceptual approach. And from here, From here I want to kind of give you again a little bit of European background. One of the functions in the European context is regulation. We have the European emission standards are kind of for the Bharat standard, the guiding model. The Indian regulator has adopted the European emission standard and called it the Bharat standard. So I haven't gone into the exact details and compared to what extent it is replicating the European standard, but my notion is that there is something we could compare if we had proper data. In the European context, here you see the Euro 5 diesel norm was 180 milligram per kilometer, and testing this one vehicle, which was a Mercedes diesel, only in this very instance was actually meeting the regulation here. So there is something wrong. Yeah? Similarly here with buses, they have tested buses and found that the actual on-the-road emissions are 2.5 to 6 times higher than the norm for buses of Euro 6 diesel standard 400 milligram per kilowatt hour. Basically, it goes back to kind of not completely stress that would make the testers, the laboratories that test the vehicles believe that they are within the range, that it's all correct according to the regulation. But then 20 minutes into driving the vehicle on the road, you would realize that in a sudden the emissions go up. So definitely one of the critical moments for the Europeans to rethink, especially the automakers, to rethink their strategies. And I think also in the Indian context, not necessarily because of cheating, but perhaps because of air quality issues, we'll come to that a little later, emission standards had to be implemented more stringently. And one of the solutions is vehicle electrification, because you don't have end pipe pollution happening. Why battery electric vehicles? No local air pollution, and I'm talking about full battery electric vehicles. The plug-in hybrids can always switch, so it's only the full battery electric vehicles and the fuel cell vehicles actually that are associated with no local air pollution in the moment they get used. Yeah? No sound pollution. No direct atmospheric pollution if run on clean electricity. So again, this concept of climate neutral electric mobility. And then interesting for an industry which is about to evolve, which does not necessarily has a long path dependency or lock-in, the fact that battery electric vehicles consist of significantly fewer parts. There's significantly less maintenance to it as compared to the internal combustion engine. And then also the shift to more electric and electronic parts. This entire digitalization coming in, automation of the vehicle. And then we also found that battery electric vehicles are significantly more energy efficient. We have significantly less losses in the conversion of energy because the electricity can be used directly as form of kinetic energy. Now let me get into the leading markets. This is data from the International Energy Agency, which comes out with the global EV outlook annually. And what you can see is we can't really find India. We see China here in green. We distinguish battery electric from plug-in hybrid. Then in blue, Europe, again, darker blue, battery electric, lighter blue, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and then the United States, and then the rest of the world. And I was wondering, India should have an interest, so where is India in this? One last slide in this context here, the manufacturers. Very interesting that the latest since the year 2015, China is clearly showing the world we're going to be big in this. Leading manufacturers. Okay, but where is India? When I came, I was very positive about finding something like Fame India. Yes, there is data. That's great. And it's even produced in a fairly appealing way. You can get an overview of the entire country. When you go on their website, you can also open this and you can see the modal breakup. Like what is it in the two-wheelers, the three-wheelers. No, three-wheelers actually you can't find because they're exempted from the registration. So when it comes to data cleaning, you always have these issues struggling with how comprehensive, how complete is my data set actually. Four-wheelers and buses. So when I started to collect that data, and this website gets updated every 15 seconds. And there's no Excel sheet attached to it. So what I had to do was, every end of the month, go on the website, take a screenshot, go into every single state and collect the data for every single state. I've done that. I don't want to go too deep into it, but I thought it's a good source for some data, so why not harvesting it to the maximum. Anyways, back then we had slightly more than 160,000 vehicles registered. That is early October 2017. And now jump forward, end of March, end of the tax year 2019, we had 280,000 vehicles. That's a good growth for slightly more than a year and a half. And for the tax year 18-19, so from April 1st, 18 to 31st of March 19, it was roughly 92,000 vehicles in total. Good figure. However, then Fame India 2 kicked in, and I don't know what happened, but since Fame India 2, April 2019, the data is not getting updated. So, kind of, I don't know why. There's no link to please here pay for the report, nothing of that sort. If someone finds some good data on how the numbers have increased, I'd be very interested to have them. And let me just mark the leading states. We have here Maharashtra with the highest figures, followed by Gujarat, then Uttar Pradesh, Haryana coming in fourth, and then here the NCR Delhi. What's also interesting is that the website gives you immediately figures related to how much fuel has been saved, because one of the leading motives is to reduce oil import dependency. And then also CO2 emission reductions. So if we now go back to this overview, what I have basically done is I have done an event history analysis. I have developed an overview, what has happened when, I've listed it chronologically, and I've then connected it to the different functions. The different innovation functions. And one leading argument, for example, for the push to a more stringent standard, vehicle emission standard, and behind that also a push for electric vehicles, was that Justice Lokur and Gupta ruled out registration of vehicles below Bharat Standard 4, effective from April 1st, 2017, arguing, and I quote, "We cannot be asked to shut our eyes to the phenomenal rise in pollution levels in the country. While the development versus environmental paradigm could be debated upon, there cannot be any debate in the development versus public health paradigm." So here you can see how I have started to fill it up. It is not coming across chronologically, but this is basically in a very compressed weigh what India's narrative of history, chronology of climate neutral electric mobility is all about. I think in our memory, one of the important statements, like it is also a very important year, 2017. You can say it goes back to 1994, when Chetan Maini started his Reva company in the country and was also producing in 2001 the first, most affordable battery electric vehicle of the world. But in our kind of recent memory, it is more associated with the year 2017, when the ministers have actually come out and tried to push for it. That was in April, Minister Goyal, and then in the fall, Gadkari. But they were immediately, more or less immediately, kind of pushed back by SIAM, the Society of Indian Auto Manufacturers, who had come up with a white paper saying something like, why don't you try this in public transport? The full electrification in something that is under your control, and we would take care of the rest, but give us a little more time. Why don't we try to look at full electrification of the vehicle fleet, their vehicle fleets by 2047, 100 years of independence in India. So an interesting kind of back and forth between the regulator and the actual industry players. 2017, we also had Niti Aayog and the Rocky Mountains Institute organizing something called the charrette. It was a multi-stakeholder workshop, basically over multiple days. You had industry, you had government, you had academia, you had different research organizations, NGOs coming together to think about how could this be done. And to identify challenges and just the way forward. 2 reports have come out as a result of that. And Rocky Mountains Institute is still very active, working with especially now the government of Delhi to push for more vehicle electrification. So the second report, particularly interesting because it looked into the battery. When we talk about battery electric vehicle, the kind of central component that is the most expensive part and the most interesting is actually the battery. So given that the country wants to move out of its oil dependency, at least on paper, what would be the new kind of dependency be? And the new dependency would be to either import batteries, battery cells, assemble them in the country, or to try to get the raw materials to produce more of it in the country itself. So one of the Rocky Mountains Institute reports delve deeper into that question, which I think is a very important one if we are seriously thinking about the transition to electric vehicles made in India. No? From the government perspective, also interesting was the Energy Efficiency Services Limited initiative, where the government, through public procurement, tried to change the entire government vehicle fleet, starting with a tender of 10,000 electric vehicles, which initially went to Tata, but then Mahindra was complaining and also got a share of it. Turned out that in the end, instead of 10,000 vehicles being delivered, it was just 1,500. A lot of MOUs have been signed with different states, but the implementation is definitely lagging behind. However, what we can see in the streets today is charging stations, whether you come to Connaught Place or nearby India Habitat Center, on Karn Market, various places, you would find charging stations carrying the EESL symbol, because that was part of the funding and part of the, let's develop the ecosystem, setting up charging stations, and not just on government property grounds. In terms of policies or regulation, and the story or the history of that, it all started with the AFSTP. Let me think. Alternative fuel and surface transport policy. I think that's what it stands for. In that document from 2010, the first time it was discussed to have electric vehicles, some mild form of electric vehicles in India. But then the latest with 2017, the government zoomed in on battery electric vehicles. Because what we understand is that a hybrid electric vehicle is actually a more luxurious kind of product, because you have two engines, you have two drivetrains kind of inbuilt. Why would anyone do that? So from the European perspective, and maybe also some Americans, the idea was, yeah, it's a bridge technology. We want to help the reluctant customer kind of to get adjusted to battery electric vehicles. But in the end, expensive, a lot of parts required, and I don't think they have sold too well. You can see in the statistics that battery electric vehicles are at least twice as much sold. So anyways. And then with 2015, a mild or a small kind of funding came in, faster adoption and manufacturing of electric vehicles in India, thanks to which we have the chart. But then with the revision, FAME India 2, government listened to the industry, said, okay, we are not going to fund four-wheelers, we're not going to support four-wheelers a bit. We're going to rather look at commercial vehicles. Yes, we're also going to we're going to support two-wheelers, but public transport is more in our interest. So I think it makes sense. But people would be probably also upset, saying that why, if I want a four-wheeler, electric four-wheeler, why don't I get any form of support? Probably other reasons. When you just look at city density, congestion, I guess with two-wheelers and to stay on the commercial side and to support public transport, the approach is a little bit more sensible to these questions. What I was also very interested in was what we call an advocacy coalition. I've given you this verdict by the judges. Then India is also part of the International Energy Agency Electric Vehicle Initiative, which is a bit more moderate compared to, like in its goal to have vehicles in the Indian market. They have signed an agreement to have 30% of electric vehicle of any kind in the Indian market. Actually, everyone who has signed it globally has that goal. 30% of electric vehicles in the market by 2030, which I think is somewhat realistic over the medium term, maybe not the short term. At the moment, the market is down, and I don't see, the uptake, the sales have gone down dramatically over the last couple of weeks and months even. But when we look at climate electric mobility, what you would do is you would look at India's energy mix, right? You can do this at an aggregate level, you can do this at the state level. We have studied the case of Tamil Nadu, for example, where we have a fairly high share of renewables in the mix. So the higher the share of renewables in the mix, the more sense it makes to have electric vehicles. But then beyond that, you can also look into cases like here, Exicom and Magenta working on a solar-powered charging station nearby Mumbai, where if that's your station, like this is where I normally charge, you can say that my electricity is clean because this charging station runs on solar power, right? Similarly, you would hear Amitav Kant today talking about a push towards more roof solar PV, because that would increase the share of renewables per housing society. So there are these kind of, you can call them more granular approaches to clean electricity, rather than thinking, you know, entire India or the state of Gujarat only. And yeah, as in the case of Turbe in Mumbai, we would have such an example. And I'm sure there are more of these examples today. This is from mid-2018. We're now almost in mid-2020. I'm sure we can, there is, for example, also an app, Electrifree, no? Someone has developed an app. I'm sure there are multiple apps out there where you can see where your charging station is. And ideally, you would also know how clean your mix, your electricity mix is, that you would get there. And then actually this study was done 1994 to 2018. That's why you can't see much beyond that over here. But one of the interesting examples is also Ashok Leyland. This is again Chetan Maini kind of entering the stage after multiple years, even decades, working on clean mobility. Ashok Leyland, in collaboration with his company Some Mobility, working on, yeah, how can we transform the public transport system? How can we make that cleaner? And they have, yeah, it's one of these demonstration models where they do battery swapping. Battery swapping is an interesting solution because you reduce the time that it takes to charge. It can be done theoretically in also 5 to 7 minutes, which is the time you would take to charge your conventional vehicle, fuel your conventional vehicle as well. It comes with other challenges. Some people say they would not be comfortable with sharing a kind of battery with someone else. However, especially for smaller vehicles like 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers, I think it is an interesting option, and they have done it for buses as well. Fully automated. There are videos on YouTube how it works, so one can actually get a direct idea of how it's done. And again, this idea of clean mobility can materialize around electric mobility, though once you broaden up the spectrum of the entire life cycle of a vehicle, some people would want to contest that, because you have to look at, you know, where do we get the raw materials from, how do they get shipped, the manufacturing, and then also the afterlife, right? What do we do second, third life with a traction battery, or how do we recycle it? What I know from some research working on batteries is that they say as long as the factory is running on clean power, you also bring down you know, emissions associated with that battery pack. Obviously, makes sense, but I haven't seen a full life cycle assessment yet, and I haven't seen it in comparison completely to conventional vehicles, or let's say the fuel cell. Yeah, I have also put my figures into maps, so I thought that would be interesting to kind of see where we could potentially find the cleanest vehicles. Turns out here the installed renewable energy capacity in India, end of 2018, the highest was in Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Rajasthan. So the greener, the darker the green, the higher the installed capacity of renewables. And then here, the stock of electric vehicles per state. Again, the darker, the higher the stock per state. So Maharashtra looks pretty good. Maybe not the darkest in terms of its installed capacity of renewables, but a high share of electric vehicles. Yeah, here Chetan Maini with Ashok Leyland, the bus. Here also interesting, Ola Mobility, trying to push for electric vehicles as part of their fleet as a commercial application. They have also come out with a report which is publicly available, but quite challenged by temperatures as far as I understand. So batteries work well within a certain temperature range, and over the summers when the heat, the street heat is increasing, batteries might actually have an issue functioning properly in India. And then finally, I keep including this picture. They have introduced a shuttle service at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, which runs on batteries. It's a battery electric vehicle to do the shuttle service from the parking lot to the hospital. You know, it's a symbol that, yeah, we do care for our lungs in some sense. If they wouldn't start, who would? This is our initiative, our center. We call it JCharge, the Jindal Center for Holistic Advisory on Resources and Energy Governance, where we look at digital applications in the clean power sector, and then free of vehicle pollution, directing us to electric mobility. So you can check it out. There are some publications there. We're working on more. For example, currently I'm about to complete a study on India's electric vehicle charging infrastructure needs until 2030. A little bit challenged by a lack of proper data, but we're working on, with scenarios to kind of extrapolate, see, 3 different scenarios. Where could we go? Where would we maybe go? What would be the need of charging infrastructure across the country? Yeah. Thank you for your attention. I'm now all ears to hear your doubts and questions. And
thank you, Professor Anika, and it was really a nice landscape picture you have to give in front of us, that how and why. So your focus was more on what and why we should go for EV, and what is the need, and what steps government has taken till date. There are still some issues which might be directly related to the policy angle and economic angle. So how evolution this entire EV market is going to evolve, how this market is going to put impact on existing businesses, keeping whether it's a two-wheeler or four-wheeler or transport vehicles, and what policy angle needs to be looked into that can be also narrated. What's your view on that point? Is that exactly what economic impact or economic views are going to affect this market?
Are we talking about policy recommendations?
Yeah, we were so late, we had to do some interviews.
Too late. We're just done. Now the question part starts. Please have a seat. Welcome. So you mean in terms of policy recommendations? So,
Can I just add to that question? So, in terms of the strategic document for the government of India on electric vehicles, they had essentially earmarked 2 areas. One is environment. So, why India needs electric vehicles was environment and energy security. On the environment part, they wanted to know with respect to climate change and what impact it will have on India's INDCs. The second one was what impact will it have on India's air quality. So these were there in the NITI Aayog document. And with respect to energy security, INDCs.
the nationally determined contributions.
And the important thing which created a problem right now was with respect to the battery technology which should be used. For example, globally we now know that LG is not supplying to suppliers like Jaguar and various others. Okay, they have Tesla is kind of outlined there. There was another report which says only we instead of looking at electric vehicles, let's move to electric mobility. And in various parts of Delhi now we have a full electric mobility transition, which is you go in your electric rickshaws to the metro station, metro is electric, and you again deboard. So it's a 100% electric solution, which is partially jugaad, which means so that was one of these things. Anyway, so what I wanted was it is quite apparent that Indian policy has failed because it doesn't show up globally. That was the point we were making there.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. It does not show up because the international data looks at four-wheelers.
Okay.
And India is 80% two-wheelers.
20% what?
Two-wheelers. We have 80% two-wheelers, 13% four-wheelers, then different forms of commercial vehicles. India does not show up in the international statistics because it is a two-wheeler market.
Scooters, motorcycles.
Yeah. And
Even
three-wheelers, which
yeah, and also especially in the electric mobility or electric vehicle, when you apply that perspective, even then, it does not show because it is two and three.
qualified the rating?
No. Yeah, so that's the catch.
Okay, so
Yeah. Let me come back to your question about policy recommendations. My notion is that this market is distorted. My starting point is the climate. We need to reduce emissions dramatically everywhere. I don't want to go into equity questions, but the notion is that China and India have the possibility to leapfrog, to disrupt the market early on, and to adopt a technology also in their own manufacturing that is of a different quality. The market is distorted to the effect that externalities of the transport sector are not factored in. Yes, there is a fuel charge, a mineral oil charge, but if you look at the actual emissions generated in the transport sector and the harm that does, it's not priced into what we actually pay. So carbon pricing would be one way of looking at the transport sector also in India to make people, I don't think it is implementable, but it would be right to put a correct price on an internal combustion vehicle, on the fuel, and then you would see how the price of the electric vehicle and the electricity would be much less. And that's where the economics would start to make sense. You can also do it like the Norwegians. Yes, a very rich nation which lives off its oil wealth while having 98% clean electricity, where they have started to support even free charging, free use of ferries, free use of tunnels, no value-added tax. The most comprehensive policy package in place, perhaps globally, is still in Norway. So they have very proactively, you can say, manipulated or shaped the market through the regulation, and through that have now come to a sales share of 50% for battery electric vehicles.
What country are you?
Norway, not necessarily comparable to India. You would probably say that maybe China is more comparable, but also China has invested heavily since around the year 2006. Clearly a lot of money has gone into vehicle electrification, but here you also have an industry that is state-owned, so has to kind of more abide by, the plans, the ideas articulated from within the government. So there might be one of the reasons here why it's not working as well in India, but that's more of a hypothesis than really an argument.
Actually, coming to the policy angle, since obviously your primary interest is from the policy perspective, how things are working out. pros and cons of electric vehicles vis-a-vis the hydrocarbons is very low. I mean, that is something that, from a strategic perspective, India's dependency on the Middle East or to North America for the oil, or if you look at the pollution angle to it. So there are similar costs to it as a country. You also talk about a model that clearly works in a slightly different context of Norway, but also in other countries. So therefore, you're talking about a situation where the costs are clearly lined up, and also a model which seems to be working in a slightly different context. So from a policy angle, what do you think is therefore missing, in the Indian context? So what is stopping India from implementing it in a way in which it has to be? So what I'm saying is, what do you see the gap? Where is the gap in terms of what should be working and what India is not doing? Because clearly India has made certain gestures. I think the government of India, the current administration is pretty interested in making that switch. They have made certain tax waivers, and so what do you think? Where is the gap? If you could discuss, let's say, the top 2 or 3 gaps which could possibly nudge the country further towards the adoption of EVs.
See, I would always adopt the role of a potential customer. Let's take the very successful Tata Nexon. A lot of people have bought it. Just very recently, the electric version has come out. Twice as expensive as the base model. So here my issue would start. It's twice as expensive. I don't know where to charge. I have a housing society, but every Monday morning my electricity runs on DC kind of situation. So there were a lot of calculations done by various organizations in the country that said that at the individual household level, charges for electricity would at least double. So it's not just your charges, it's also where is the electricity coming from? Who is producing that electricity? So people already think about, at the discom level, transformation stations that go vertical. Land issues. It's such a complex challenge. There's no easy way of saying this, that, and that needs to be addressed. I think it requires a lot, really a lot of determination to get these things done. And GIZ, the German International Collaboration, has worked with 2 discoms in Delhi to look at, okay, what would be the requirement if X amount of electric vehicles would come into the market. And they've done some pretty good analyses, so I think the discoms are ready. But then who is investing into the charging infrastructure? Is it the public? Is it the discom that has to pay for it? Are there some private companies that feel like, okay, this is an interesting kind of venture, let's try something? Standardization was a big issue for a long time. Now India has said, okay, we have our own standard, Bharat standard, one for AC, one for DC. They have also accepted the CHAdeMO standard, the Japanese standard, and the European standard. Creating again a little bit of, now you have to have charging stations for all 3 different standards. We're creating maybe more issues than simplifying and making things feasible.
You're talking about a country where you correctly point out that the house electricity also runs on diesel. So it's a very different market. It's a market where the unit of mobility is not a 4-wheeler, but a 2-wheeler. So the majority of the population rides. So obviously it's a very different market than Norway. Per capita incomes are way larger than what's in India. So in this particular context, because India is not Norway, India is not US, and to a large extent India is not even China, right? It will take a time to actually reach that size of the economy and per capita.
Absolutely.
So the point I'm trying to say is, in the specific context of the Indian economy and the Indian people, what are the policy interventions that can possibly, because you've correctly laid out the problems that the house electricity, you're talking about, it's not 24 hours. You can't be absolutely sure. So talking about charging stations for vehicles therefore is a wishful thinking. So what can we do?
Especially the bigger they get. So maybe for two-wheelers, that's still all kind of within the possible. I can imagine
Possibly.
I can imagine driving, a moped, a motor scooter. If I can take the battery upstairs, I think, charging it overnight, having the comfort of the night, the thing getting charged, I think would be fine. That should not be too much of an issue. We have looked at the case of Tamil Nadu, I've mentioned, and we've looked specifically at two-wheelers in Tamil Nadu. There was an initiative by the former, how do you call them, the head of the state, the chief minister. She had passed away, but before she had passed away, I'm sorry, I forgot her name, very difficult. She had launched an initiative of X amount of scooters for working women.
Yeah.
So why has this not been made an initiative for electric two-wheelers? That could have been done easily. I mean, price-wise, we found that electric two-wheelers are not necessarily more expensive. Of course, you have different kinds, different comforts,
So
different
Bajaj is coming up with a electric motorbike. It's a two-wheeler. So no, that's very interesting because I think
There's an entire range of companies that have already, the vehicles, the two-wheelers are out there. But then really I know it's a different context, but in Norway they said the spread of word that this is good, this works, this makes a difference, it's convenient to drive, it works, was very important. If people had concerns over range issues, all kinds of things, then it would have not worked. But the spread of positive words has made a difference. Plus, this entire policy setup. FAME India too supports two-wheelers, so there is an incentive. You would have to look into the different price ranges for the two-wheelers, and then what does that make? Maybe it's 2%, 3%, 5% of the final cost. But still, then you would look at the charges for the electricity compared to the petrol. And then also over time, price is coming down. It makes sense.
Price is dripping along with the scaling of the mass and the scaling of the business. So I think there are a few points being made by Anika, and it was really a very nice point which you raised, that what are the challenges here in terms of the Indian economy, in terms of growing India. We are nowhere near to China or nowhere not US, so we have a different structured market.
Yeah.
So the broad challenge is what I think from the discussion which Professor Anika gave, that we discussed about the charging infra. So establishing charging infrastructure. So she mentioned even about the charging infrastructure, and she talked about the battery swapping, if you remember. But she told that now people are not ready for the battery swapping. It means there is something which is need to spread about awareness, that what intent should be there so that people should start sharing this battery swapping content to be ready. What sort of charging infrastructure needs to develop, whether the pricing of electricity should be same. For example, if pricing of electricity, somebody is using electricity here in the household services and somebody is using same electricity for mobility, whether it should be same pricing or there should be unit-wise cost. If you are, let's suppose, because it might be very difficult if somebody is going to that much developing that much charging infrastructure is an additional cost. So in that sense, we are supposed to think that yes, like government say that you can consume this much power, but beyond that, if you're going to consume, then it is going to be charged on the basis of your consumption rate. So that pricing of power maybe depend on consumption rate. That can be one solution, because establishing charging infrastructure, and because this is not petrol or diesel which you bring your vehicle and wait for 2 minutes and 3 minutes it got filled. No, it's a battery. It will take time for charging. So definitely we should aware people that there is no harm if we are going to share this battery swapping strategy. In that sense, they are supposed to understand that look, the battery which they are taking, those are having same company, same process, same awareness. So that awareness needs to develop. So I think that awareness needs to create it. We are supposed to create a readiness and check the readiness label. Government has planned, they spoke that they are going to make it out, but whether society is ready, whether our conceptualization process which has been done, whether we are ready for adopt that practices, that readiness has been tested, that need to be tested. Then it comes to promotion. Government has already given some sort of promotion in terms of if you are buying EV, they are giving some sort of exemption on some taxes. So they're trying from their point of view, but I think there needs to be a lot to done in terms of infrastructure, in terms of technological aspects, in terms of social aspects, and there are 4 or 5 angles which needs to incorporate while coming out the final policy decision. Probably these are the main hurdles still date in India, that policy angle, society angle, technology angle, and the business angle need to incorporate all together in order to make EV successful in India. I think this is the main crux of this entire discussion.
Actually, continuing your explanation, as per whatever I've been researching on, for a public policy, the government needs to constitute what actually lies in the interest of the public. And the main question lies is environment even a concern when a consumer goes for the purchase of a vehicle? So, the attitudinal problem of a consumer and how we need to create awareness that, actually strikes in the mind of a consumer that I should go for an electric vehicle and not ICE vehicle, as Sir mentioned. Awareness has to be spread. They need to see the advantage in purchasing an electric vehicle, even if it in terms of cost or the maintenance or the effect on the environment. So that has to be answered by the government and the
Actually, I was attending an event where the Society for Manufacturers of Electric Vehicles were present. I think Mr. Gill is heading it. Gill. And he said they did a study with rickshaw drivers, and it turned out they could increase their monthly income by 100% converting to electric vehicles. Unfortunately, his presentation was really good, but what I got in hand was not really something that I could share with you. But if I can rely on what he said it made total sense for the 3-wheeler segment. And unfortunately, we don't have good data because 3-wheelers are exempted from the registration. But what I understand is that this is actually the fastest growing market for electric vehicles in India. So doing a little bit of a study on this could reveal very interesting, also for the economics, insights into what drives these people or people who rent them out, and to what advantage. But then it's also very local; it's neighborhood level. So good. I mean, can be studied. It's not too big. It's not too ambitious. Mm-hmm.
So you think that the registration of these 3-wheelers is not registering them is a loophole or a drawback of the policy? Like they should be registered so that we can see numbers. That.
Yeah, that's for analysts always interesting, no? And I think even for the government it would be interesting to know. But you can know in indirect ways through either sales figures that registration can go irrespective of sales, or sales can go irrespective of registration, or a lot of people have also retrofitted. So if you can get a sense for it, maybe not accurate data, but you can get a sense for the dimensions once you start to dig deeper into who's producing these vehicles, or who's working, like what kind of workshop is working on converting a conventional rickshaw into an e-rickshaw. All these kind of things happen, so it requires some investigation to get an idea. But
Professor, what are the industry point of view challenges? Although industry has taken over and they started producing, and we've been talking about the customer, they are having some resistance, they are not ready, they are not aware. But whether there is any challenge for the industry, whether apart from technology, so whether there is any policy level challenge for the industry, those who are producing EVs or not producing EVs, what exactly? Apart from technology collaboration.
I think for a long time it was charging standardization, because that's a very important intersection for both the vehicle producer and then the infrastructure producer. But that has been solved.
Recently I heard, there was a news that now it has been agreed that all of these EVs are going to having same mode of charging and everything, I think. Something, same socket of charging. It was there in news.
I want to add something to that. I mean, even besides standardization, which of course is a major problem, I think the constant change in government policies, be it like forward or backward, is also like a major problem. Like one day you have like at least these safeguards from the government, or these standardization from the government, or these incentives that are out there for people. But let's say, then these things change. The government policies change, be it for the good or for the bad. Like, we've seen that with solar panels, import duty and things like that. And also, let's say, you're providing an incentive for say, like, this happened in California, to buy, electric vehicles.
But it had changed
And
only
let's
in
say-
the positive direction always.
Yeah, but like, it's
I don't think so. It has changed.
no, not always. Like at least with regard to solar panel, it did not.
No, what you could say is that there are issues with implementation. If you just look at the Energy Efficiency Services Limited initiative, where they wanted to 500,000 vehicles in the entire country under government, use. That was the vision, to electrify them, and then they fall short in like 1,500.
Yeah.
So that you can say, okay, ambition is there, but then when a minister, or not just someone of a minister level, says that, when someone says, I don't like the Tata, I don't like the Tata Tigor, I want an SUV. If someone says something like that, then okay, he's maybe an individual, but of certain rank, of certain power. What does that mean for the rest of, the bureaucracy, the administrations, everyone now kind of,
Yeah,
so
and
we
also,
can't continue, or what is,
This has not happened so far, but what if there's a change in government tomorrow and then they're like, we don't care so much about the environment, or like, they shift the focus.
Okay, just to butt in, there's a 12th February 2020 Economic Times report which says that electric vehicles charging infrastructure will be available at every 4 kilometers in big cities. And the biggest thing, and there'll be 26,000 charging stations to state-run providers. And the surveys basically said that the biggest problem Indian consumers said was range anxiety. So
Yeah.
the biggest problem which Indian consumers for vehicles were saying range anxiety, and that is what they addressed first. So this is 12th February
This is
2020.
the government.
Yeah, government. But
Yeah,
this-
I think my observation is also not that there would be a lot of back and forth. I think it is more like we try to be forward looking, we try to be as constructive as possible, but we kind of run into issues on the ground. Whether this is people saying certain things that might put other people's off, or in the case of the Nagpur example, the Nagpur pilot project. It is not in the report, but I heard from people kind of off the record that unfortunately the temperatures were above 60 degrees. The battery is not gonna cope with 60 degrees. And this is something that is gonna come up every summer. It's nothing that you can easily, maybe you can insulate the battery better. You can put it higher up, create more distance between the road and the battery to just make sure that temperatures are not going to get this high in the battery to make it work properly. But that's still technical issues to solve.
Basis like cost for production, like let's say if you want to include some sort of coolant, something like that around it, then it will just raise the cost.
Yeah, I think there are always, people are always divided over this is all solvable, and the people who are more like, I'm uneasy about this. And I think it really needs someone like Elon Musk, who has this, no matter what, we get this done. We just need to take a good amount of money into our hands and just push and push and push. And
That's also one of the problems that India is facing, like it's not a rich country like the Norwegian countries you were giving an example of, nor it's like China that the government decides, okay, this needs to be done, and no matter what, how we're doing it.
Yeah.
So that's also another problem. Like, I had a couple of questions, but some of the things that you discussed already, and I'm really sorry I came really late, so my questions
I
you
think
might have addressed them.
it is recorded. I think it is
Okay.
it is recorded so that it can be shared, so you can watch it online if you want. There should be a link, and then you feel free to shoot
Can
me
you
a
give
message.
some examples about the battery swapping, like some countries where it's already been working?
Actually, it started in Israel. Shai Agassi, what is this organization called? So
The
it's
buses?
no, it was not
Cars.
buses. I think it was cars. I'm not too sure, but the concept is initially Israeli. Shai Agassi was also sitting with the German Transport Ministry one day, proposing his idea. But ministry said no, we are not comfortable with the idea that you wouldn't do that in your mobile phone either. You wouldn't go somewhere and just exchange your battery. That is not something that they felt comfortable about. However, I mean, what I like about the Indian approaches is thinking about it also in terms of a business model. Mercedes in the early 1990s thought that if we disintegrate the battery from the vehicle as a product, something to sell, the vehicle would become very affordable, and the battery you lease. So you would basically start to build up an ecosystem around the battery that like people sell oil today, they would lease something, they would lease batteries. So the entire maintenance, the charging would be with a separate entity, and you would just come, get it, it meets certain quality standards, it's not going to ruin your car, and drive off. And you get a same standard kind of battery at the next battery swapping station. But to build that up, nobody has done it, as far as I know. I think Chitan Maini is trying with,
just a comment, what I've seen with Indian government, specifically with electricity also, that I think 55 to 60% is still coming from fossil fuels, and rest 35 to 40 we can say that India has started getting from renewables, whether it's hydro, wind or solar energy. But if we are actually if the Indian government is actually trying to make a change, then we should see that the fossil fuel ratio should go down as we are continuously investing and showing that we are investing in renewable energy also.
but I think that's happening. Under the NDCs, 40% non-fossil fuels in the Indian energy mix by 2030.
But I think whenever we talking about, renewables, the battery issues, the storage is the major issue. When, for example, for the solar energy, if you do not store it till the time it reaches to the consumer, the 40% or the 50% is already gone.
So the idea with the battery is you can either have a stationary battery for your excess renewable, for maybe running buildings. But what you could also do is you can put this into a traction battery, which you use for your mobility needs. Battery is battery. I mean, it might be a little different in terms of its chemical composition, cathode, anode, electrodes. They might be different because the needs are different. There's a lot of, in the traction battery you have a lot of charging and uncharging constantly when you use your vehicle regularly. Conventionally, there would be batteries even in coal power plants because they have to sometimes have a little bit of a backup for moments where the production is not there. Sometimes they just bridge 15 seconds even. So batteries have been used for a long time in energy storage, but kind of the range of applications is kind of increasing. And now even in the mobility sector, people are saying that this was consumer electronics, no? The batteries came from the consumer electronics side. Elon Musk was using these little 8051, I believe, Panasonic batteries that were used in conventional electronics, and the German auto industry was like, what nonsense. But now, over time, he has developed his own battery with Panasonic. By the way, you have a Panasonic battery factory in Haryana. So I was really like, oh, interesting. Why? What is happening? So he has become a really serious challenger. And now he has also come to my home state in Germany. I had written my PhD on electric mobility in my home state. And I'm like, oh, what a blessing. Now he's coming. And now shaking up the entire German auto industry. Good. People need competitors. People need to be challenged. Sometimes people need to be pushed in the right direction.
Your next question should be, when do we have self-driving cars in India?
Is that our problems are very different. So the solutions also need to be different. It's not that these problems cannot be solved,
Absolutely.
but perhaps that we are looking at a different problem in a different context.
Absolutely. One of the third actually reasons also jobs. If you just look at your youth and the employment needs that are coming up. The concept of lock-ins, that you have assets in place. The conventional industry is running maybe not today that well, but it is running. There's a lock-in to the conventional technology. But now to make the investments, to prepare for something that is future-oriented, that gives jobs, sustainable jobs, future-oriented jobs. I don't think it's going to be in the conventional
the
auto
switch
industry.
from hydrocarbons to electric is happening. It's unstoppable. It's going to happen because there are tremendous forces that are pushing it. It's very interesting. One of the courses that I take is design thinking. To innovate in a particular context. And one of the groups in my courses came up with these electric bikes. They didn't have the swap feature. They said that So one of the things while you were saying about there's a major issue with the reach of the electric vehicle. So perhaps intercity travel from EVs is not the answer. Perhaps it needs to be hyper-local, because when you have the population base, it makes sense for that business model of providing batteries as a swapping arrangement. Because you're talking about huge, densely populated areas. So then it makes sense. E-rickshaws, these guys, they charge the vehicles the entire night, if I understand it correctly, so that they drive it in the morning. So what they do is, they leave the e-rickshaws in a charging facility. They pay about $100 or $200, I'm not exactly sure. And these e-rickshaws get charged, in the morning they collect and they drive on the roads. But it works because, we were talking about very densely populated market areas, where, it works. So perhaps in the Indian context, given whatever the constraints we have, the answer is local travel from the EVs. So currently, I don't think we have reached a stage we're talking about, intercity or interstate travel, because that would mean that you need range. Range currently technologically is not possible.
At least not at scale.
The batteries are very expensive and they provide a limited range. But within a particular
Though the price has also come down significantly.
and it's going to come down. So I think it's a curve. It's like the computer hardware. It's like peanuts now.
So if you if you're interested in, Bloomberg has some really good material on this, and there was a recent conference in China, Shanghai, where Bloomberg was also presenting. 87% over the last 10 to 12 years, the price have come down for lithium-ion batteries, and will come further down.
It's like Moore's law. I'm not sure exactly, but
maybe not Moore's law, but
so
yeah.
Keep on coming down.
You can say it has a lot to do with scale, and yeah.
And technology also.
Yeah, technological development that is, efficiency
I
improvements.
accompanied her once in her field visits, and your thing is true actually. Now that I realize it, we went to a place next to CR Park, and they charge the batteries overnight. That's right, and they also swap. Okay, so the tuk-tuks and say they have a swapping and
And it's
like I go
it's a thriving business model in India.
Actually, it's very messy.
It's
Even
thrived
during
so much that now it's a nuisance.
even during daytime they were charging. So whatever vehicle was available is in use, and batteries were inside and outside the vehicles. You had lots of cables all over the place, connected to.
So in spite of all this, I think Indian EV market or energy structure, energy basket of India has it changed shape over the last few years. You can see it was 80, then 70, then 60. Now we're talking about 50 to 55% share for thermal power plant, and definitely we are trying to focus more on alternative sources of energy, whether it's only solar or hybrid in terms of solar mixing with the wind and whatever it is, we are trying to put forward. Yes, it is indeed important that we should go for the new aspects of the evaluation. That's why an environment friendly, eco-friendly system that needs to be created. Government has taken few steps. Still, there are some hurdles in terms of societal approach, mental approach, because everybody is not accommodated with the change. So definitely we have to acclimate some time with the change. So we have to make our pace along with the change. Society will change, our perception will change, thought process will change. Probably it will take time in terms of varying society. Government will also come up because I think they have not freezed yet. They don't have enough appropriate policy. So they are changing because they're finding something which should be done in order to promote it. Probably this is the reason they are changing. But I think if this is what responsibility of academia and as well as industry to handle, academia will put forward through their research and intense exercises. Engineering guy, they will put forward something in terms of technological upgradation. Management guy will come up with the business ideas, and whereas policy guys, they will come with the policy legislation. But definitely we can incorporate and make all of them all together and hope for best. Definitely we can make a better future in India and safe environment where you can breathe and you will not.
Everyone, not just me, everyone.
We all can breathe in a positive environment. So that's indeed required.
Let me add to this. Burulal, who was heading an important commission on air pollution or pollution in general, said that 42% of Delhi's air pollution is due to the transport sector. Even across the season, a major share of air pollution is due to the transport sector. We have to tackle it. I mean, there's no way around it.
I think government needs to be more proactive, especially in terms of engaging, common masses. I mean, I'm sure industry engagement is there, but I'm just adding to your point, especially awareness and engagement is something that's really, we've seen they've done it successfully. If you look at ATM and FASTag and all those things.
So there are a few more things which needs to be implemented. For example, this is just an example. We all need electricity every time. So actually, electricity is, we need uninterrupted supply of electricity. But our infrastructure needs to be built in such a way when we do have large sun available along with us. Why we require this electricity can be used somewhere. So again, green building concept. So we are supposed to design our infrastructure in such a way that wherever we can save the energy, and then this energy can be utilized somewhere it is more needed. It is required there on road. We can make environment, we can make building in such a way that when sun is available, definitely we should use less electricity, less something.
More rigorous implementation.
Yes, so that's required.
Push for it, because we don't see it some people are generally doing it themselves, but I think if kind of force
I think that's
to answer your query, one of the useful models here to look at is the CNG. So
yes.
to combat natural gas, so it
So
needs policy intervention, it needs economies of scale for the consumer. So the
And then
consumer.
Supreme Court had forced to implement that in the public transportation sector in Delhi, when 3-wheelers changed.
See, the point is that
it worked, right?
it's easy to say that the customer's responsibility is also there to care for the environment, this and that. It is there, but the customer will eventually buy an electric vehicle when it makes economic sense for him. So you see that happening in CNG pretty rapidly.
It's not like that.
See, for
Not
CNG,
always. That's what I'm saying.
for,
you know,
for
the-
CNG,
Tesla still today is not, profitable. So it's not like that. You think you want to do some clean kind of calculation. It's not like that.
no, that's exactly what I'm saying. What I'm saying is when the customer goes to buy something, the economic angle is obviously there and the environment angle is also there. But ultimately, the decision possibly is based on is the lifetime cost of the vehicle to him. If it makes sense to him or to her, financially and economically, then the decision is made. So,
But we would have to go into a thorough analysis of what is actually being sold in India at what price. There are also,
Suzuki is a
I know, but then
it's
there are
a great
also,
example of the mindset of the Indian consumer.
true,
It's the
But it's also
bang for the buck. We're talking about
a very robust vehicle, I know. But what
what's
if,
the mileage in 1 liter, and that's one of the major. That's not the only criteria.
what is the mileage?
Mileage is how many kilometers.
No, I know. What is the mileage of the Marukis?
No, depends on the model. No?
Acha.
But for a CNG vehicle, it goes up to 30, 1 kilo, and that's why you see the switch happening. So now many customers are buying CNG because it makes economic sense.
Yeah, but I was reading an article, it was like a research publication just a couple of days ago where, there is actually a change in the trend of like Indian consumer, how they are perceiving things and what kind of things they want. Like now everybody is concerned about, say, their health in and around Delhi, right? They're probably willing to make that switch and change, especially like people at like our level. I'm not talking about,
Let's
people
certainly hope so. To what extent it's happening, but let's certainly hope so that people are more,
So it's really nice to correct it.
this debate will
And really, I think it's